They never thought you'd leave, because you stayed through the storms. You stayed when you were unheard. You stayed even when your soul whispered, "Right." That one day, you stopped explaining. You stopped wedding. You didn't slam the door. You didn't leave a note. You just vanished. And of silence? That silence speaks louder than 1,000 confrontations. Billy's disappearance isn't always an escape. Sometimes it's the final act of self-respect, a quiet revolution, a declaration without words that says, "You will never get another chance to dim my light." And now they feel it, not in public, enough in their prideful posture, but late at night, when no one is watching. This is what happens when you simply disappear. The ache of unfinished control. That's what truly unsettles them. Not your absence, not your silence, but the vanishing of the invisible strings they once used to move you. The quiet manipulations, the subtle criticisms masked as concern, the constant calculated delay of validation. Those were their tools. Tools sharpened not through loud domination, but through quiet erosion. Slowly they had trained you to seek their approval, to second-guess your instincts, to question your worth. And the more uncertain you became, the more certain they felt. That was the balance. That was the control. You never even saw it happening. That's how delicate their influence was. Delicate, but deadly. But when you walked away, you didn't just leave a space behind. You shattered a system. A system they had spent months, maybe years, perfecting. A system that relied on your responses, your need to explain yourself, your willingness to fight for the connection. They needed your reactions, more than you knew. Whether it was anger, sadness, or desperation, any reaction meant power. It meant they were still in control of your emotional weather. And suddenly, that storm went quiet. You disappeared. No warning, no closure, no final argument, just gone. You didn't beg. You didn't plead. You didn't give them one last chance to perform remorse. That script, the one they had rehearsed over and over in the mirror of your vulnerability, was now useless. Their words fell into silence. Their charm had no stage. Their control interrupted mid-sentence. And that is where the ache begins. It's not just about missing you. It's about missing their ability to influence you. You stopped giving them cues. You stopped rewarding their manipulation with engagement. You took away the very thing that fed their illusion of superiority, your attention. And without that, their tactics unravel. They don't know how to exist without someone to control, and they especially don't know how to cope with someone who no longer fears their absence. They'll try to recreate the game with others, but it won't be the same, because the person they truly wanted to conquer was you, and you slipped through their fingers, not in chaos, but in calm, not in rage, but in dignity. That's what cuts deepest. You didn't break down, you broke free. You became untouchable the moment you stopped playing. And now, the power they once wielded lies dormant, not because it was taken, but because it was never real. It only worked as long as you believed it did. And now that belief is gone, quietly, the silence they can't control. That's the first thing they feel when you disappear. It's not just the absence of your voice. It's the absence of noise they could once predict, manipulate, provoke. You used to explain yourself, didn't you? Every emotion, every shift in your mood, every disappointment. You gave them the roadmap to your mind, and with it, they always knew what buttons to push, how to reel you back in, how to twist confusion into guilt. But now, there's only silence. Not coldness, not bitterness, just a void where you used to speak. They don't know what you're thinking anymore. They don't know if you're hurting, if you're healing, if you're remembering them fondly or forgetting them entirely. That not knowing, that's what stirs them. Because before, they had access to your inner world, and now the gates are shut. Your silence becomes a mirror, reflecting their own emptiness back at them. They look for signs, they scroll, they ask around, anything, to feel like they still exist in your world. But you've gone quiet in the deepest way possible, not just in speech, but in energy. You no longer orbit them. It's the kind of silence that can't be manipulated, because it doesn't come from anger, it comes from clarity. And clarity doesn't argue, it doesn't chase. It simply walks away and lets the silence do the speaking. And what that silence says is devastating. It says you're no longer available for performance, no longer willing to dance to their tune, no longer caught in the cycle of needing to be heard by someone who only ever listened to win. They replay moments in their head, trying to figure out what the last straw was, trying to decode the quiet. But there's nothing left to decode. You're not punishing them. You're not playing games. You're just gone. And in your disappearance, the loudest truth emerges. They never really listened when you were there. They only reacted. They only dismissed. And now, with nothing to respond to, they're left to sit with themselves. And that silence, it's not peaceful for them. It's intrusive. It echoes with questions they never wanted to answer. Because silence, real silence, isn't empty. It's full of the things they pushed aside when you were around, the care they pretended not to need, the kindness they thought they could take for granted, the loyalty they assumed would never run out. All of it now wrapped in the silence you left behind. They don't know what's going on behind your quiet, and that's what unravels them. Because control needs reaction, and silence is the refusal to react. It's the end of their script, the absence of their spotlight, the moment the curtain falls and no encore comes. The mirror of regret. That's what they face when you're no longer there to distract them from themselves. When you disappear, you don't just remove your presence. You remove the one person who made excuses for their behavior, who tried to understand them when they barely understood themselves. You leave behind a silence that forces them to look inward, and what they see in that mirror, it's not flattering, because for the first time there's no one left to blame, no one to provoke, no one to gaslight into second-guessing reality, just their own reflection, growing heavier with every passing day. At first they deny it. They pretend they don't care. They wear indifference like armor. But even the strongest armor rusts in solitude. Eventually the thoughts begin to seep in. Regret, creeping in slowly like fog, blurring the certainty they once wore so confidently. They start to remember things differently. The moments they dismissed, the kindness they overlooked, the warnings they laughed off. They remember your patience, your forgiveness, the way you stayed, even when it hurt you to do so. And they begin to realize they mistook your endurance for weakness. They misread your silence as permission. And now, without you there to absorb the impact, all of it comes back to them, memory by memory, choice by choice. You weren't perfect, but you were present. And they start to understand what that meant. You showed up. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually. You gave when it wasn't convenient. You listened when it was uncomfortable. You forgave when it was undeserved. And in the cold aftermath of your absence, all that remains is a mirror reflecting the truth they never wanted to face. They didn't deserve the version of you they received. Regret doesn't scream. It whispers. It taps gently at night when they try to sleep. It lingers in the background of conversations, in the silence between distractions. It speaks in your voice sometimes, reminding them of the kindness they couldn't return, the loyalty they betrayed, the softness they saw as naive. And they wish, oh, they wish they could go back, say the words they swallowed, show the care they withheld. But the past doesn't take apologies, it only leaves lessons. This mirror doesn't lie. It shows them the smirks they gave when you cried, the silence they gave when you needed words, the absence they offered when you asked for connection. And worst of all, it shows them how deeply they misunderstood your value. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. So now they watch themselves in that mirror and they try to forget you. But forgetting someone who loved deeply, who gave completely, who disappeared without revenge, forgetting that kind of soul is impossible. Because you didn't leave scars, you left echoes, and those echoes grow louder in the absence of your presence. That's the mirror they see now, and it won't let them look away. The weight of irrelevance. That's what sinks into them, slowly, unexpectedly, after your disappearance. When you were there, they always had an audience. You listened, you noticed, you cared. Even in silence, your energy was tuned to them, aware of their moods, responsive to their needs, present in ways they never acknowledged but always relied upon. And then, one day, that quiet focus vanished, and with it, so did their sense of being significant. They thought the world revolved around them, or at least your world did. They believed your attention was automatic, your loyalty guaranteed, your presence permanent. So they stopped valuing it. They took it as a given, like the sun rising or the air they breathe. But now that it's gone, now that you no longer orbit their emotional gravity, something inside them begins to shift. For the first time, they feel what it's like to be unseen. And it's not that you're punishing them. You're simply gone. Your eyes no longer light up when they speak. Your voice no longer asks how they're doing. Your thoughts no longer drift toward them. And they feel it. They feel it in the empty space where your attention used to live. They feel it in the lack of reaction to their provocations, in the absence of someone who once made them feel like the center of something meaningful. They feel it every time they try to trigger a response and find nothing but silence in return. That's when the weight begins to grow. They start to question who they are without your attention. They wonder if they matter to anyone the way they once mattered to you. And deep down, they begin to sense something they never dared consider. Maybe they were never as important as they believed. Maybe the power they thought they had over you was borrowed, not owned. Maybe your presence was a gift they mistook for an obligation. You see, some people only feel valuable when they're being validated. And you were their mirror, the one who reflected their best parts back to them, even when they didn't deserve it. But mirrors break when handled carelessly. And now they're left with their own reflection, unfiltered, uncelebrated, untouched. What once was a confident performance begins to unravel without a stage. Because they don't just miss you, they miss who they were when you were watching. They miss the pedestal they stood on, built by your belief in them. And without that belief, they feel ordinary. The world doesn't stop for them anymore. Your world certainly doesn't. They see you moving on, not in vengeance, but in peace. They realize slowly that they were not the sun in your sky. They were just passing through your light. And now, with the spotlight gone, with the music faded and the curtain drawn, they're left standing in the quiet. no longer a lead character, but a forgotten name in the credits. That's the weight, not loss, not heartbreak, irrelevance, the phantom of what was. That's what haunts them, long after you've gone quiet. It doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in pieces, small, sharp moments scattered across their days. A smell, a song, a phrase they once heard in your voice. At first they try to brush it off, tell themselves it's nothing. But the truth is, you've become a presence in their absence. Not because you're reaching out, but because you're no longer available. And that finality, that complete severing, gives birth to something more powerful than your presence ever did. Your memory. They start to remember things they once dismissed. The way you laughed when they were being difficult. The way you stayed calm when everything was falling apart. The way you knew what they needed without them having to ask. You were a constant. And constants are never appreciated until they're gone. You weren't perfect, you weren't always right, but you were there, present, attentive, real. And now in the silence, you echo, not in anger, not in blame, but in the spaces you used to fill, spaces they never thought would feel so empty. They tell themselves they're fine, that you were too much, too emotional, too sensitive. But those words don't carry the same weight anymore. Because if you were really all those things, why do they still think of you in the quiet moments? Why do they pause when they hear your favorite song? Why does your name still come up in conversations they pretend aren't about you? That's the phantom. It doesn't beg, it simply lingers. A reminder of what once was and what could have been. You live now in the routine they used to share with you, in the seat across the table, in the missed calls they never expected to stop. They scroll back through old messages, not because they miss the conversation, but because they miss who they were when they had you. You were their witness, the one who saw them at their worst and didn't walk away. Until they gave you no choice. And now they carry that truth like a shadow, always just behind them, never loud, but never gone. They may try to replace you, quickly, recklessly, as if your presence could be duplicated, as if anyone else would laugh in the same moments, listen with the same patience, or love with the same depth. But they'll find it's not the same, because you weren't just someone. You were a chapter they didn't realize they were living until it had ended. And now, no matter who they're with, they compare. Silently, unintentionally. You're the measure they never wanted to need. That's the phantom. It doesn't ask to be remembered, it simply refuses to be forgotten. It walks beside them in their solitude. It whispers in the spaces between distractions. It lives not in what they lost, but in what they failed to recognize while it was theirs.